Fame can be intoxicating, but when mixed with steroids, it becomes lethal. In Hollywood, perfection isn't a goal, it's a demand. Muscles bigger, faces sharper, energy endless, and the cameras never stop rolling. But behind the flawless skin and sculpted abs lies something darker, a desperate addiction to strength that never truly existed. Some of the most admired stars, once envied for their superhuman physiques, were slowly consumed by the very drugs that made them icons. Steroids promised power, but delivered paranoia. They promised beauty, but gave them rage, collapse, and madness. These aren't stories of vanity, they're confessions of destruction. Who were the stars who let their ambition destroy their bodies, their minds, and their souls? And which one paid the ultimate price? This is the haunting truth behind 15 celebrities who let steroids take over their bodies. 15. Jason Momoa. He was the embodiment of raw masculinity, a man who looked like he had been carved out of the ocean itself. Jason Momoa wasn't just a star, he was a force of nature. From the fierce warrior Khal Drogo to the godlike Aquaman, he became the face of power, freedom, and rebellion against Hollywood's polished perfection. But as fame rose like a tidal wave, it carried with it an undertow that began to pull him down. To the world, his body was a temple. To the studios, it was a product. Every appearance demanded the same sculpted physique: chest of marble, arms like iron, a smile hiding the exhaustion underneath. Behind closed doors, the workouts turned brutal, the diets ruthless. Recovery pills became routine, then stronger medicine followed. Insiders whispered about hormone cycles, about injections done quietly between shoots, about the growing toll no one wanted to admit. What began as discipline slowly became dependency. Momoa's friends described his endless fatigue, his aching joints, the insomnia that shadowed him between roles. He would laugh it off, saying, "The hardest part of being Aquaman is staying Aquaman." But the joke was soaked in truth. The image that made him a legend had become a prison, a body that demanded sacrifice every single day. As years passed, the wild energy that once defined him began to fade. The weight of expectation crushed the spontaneity that once made him magnetic. His eyes, once filled with rebellion, now carried the quiet fatigue of someone trapped by his own mythology. Jason Momoa became the man who could no longer be human because the world only wanted the god. In the end, the tragedy isn't about vanity or scandal. It's about the hunger to remain immortal in an industry that worships youth and strength even when it kills both. 14. Chris Pratt. He was once the goofy, lovable guy next door, the chubby comedian from Parks and Recreation who made everyone laugh with his awkward charm. But then, almost overnight, Chris Pratt became something else entirely. The soft, friendly face turned into a chiseled jawline. The round belly became a sculpted chest. And Hollywood, always hungry for transformation, hailed him as a miracle. But behind that miracle was a story much darker than the glossy magazine spreads ever revealed. When Guardians of the Galaxy launched him into superstardom, the pressure to stay perfect became unrelenting. The studios wanted the same superhero body for every sequel, every poster, every late-night interview. Pratt became trapped in a cycle of workouts, diets, and secret medical support. Trainers spoke of his obsession with hormone balance, while rumors spread of testosterone boosters and short steroid bursts used to maintain that impossible shape. Each new movie demanded not just performance, but physical punishment. Friends noticed his mood changing sharper, quicker, almost manic at times. The fun-loving goofball who once ate burgers on set was now counting every calorie, every pill, every injection. His laughter turned mechanical, his confidence brittle. He would talk about discipline, but his eyes betrayed fatigue, the kind that comes from chasing an image that never truly belonged to him. As fame grew, his humanity shrank. The boy who once joked about his body now feared losing it. Behind every superhero role was a man terrified of fading back into ordinary. Steroids didn't just build Chris Pratt's muscles, They built a cage around his identity. Today, when he smiles for the cameras, the world sees a success story. But look closer, and you'll see something else, a man who traded authenticity for control, and in doing so, lost both. In Hollywood, transformation is worshipped, but for Chris Pratt, it became a silent addiction, written not in scandals or headlines but in every scar his ambition left behind. 13. Terry Crews. He was the walking definition of strength muscles, carved like armor, veins pulsing like cables, and a smile that made it all seem effortless. Terry Crews was larger than life, a man who turned his body into his brand. From the NFL to Old Spice ads to Hollywood comedies, his physique became his passport. But what the world saw as confidence was often a masked one, hiding a deep, consuming obsession with control, image, and the body that defined his worth. In interviews, Crews has spoken about addiction not to drugs, but to perfection. The gym became his sanctuary and his prison. His days were ruled by discipline, by the constant chase to stay relevant in a world where youth and size equal power. And while he never publicly admitted to steroid use, whispers surrounded his transformation from athlete to superhuman. Trainers and co-stars noticed the relentless schedule, the chemical recovery aids, and the quiet fury when his body began to slow. Every rep, every protein shake, every injection of confidence came with a price. His marriage suffered, his mind frayed, and his self-image twisted into something mechanical. He wasn't just building muscle, he was building armor to hide the cracks forming inside. Behind the bright lights and bulging biceps was a man terrified of losing control. Crews once said, "I was addicted to looking like I had it all together." That confession cut deeper than any scandal ever could. Because in Hollywood, losing your body can feel like losing your identity. Terry's strength, once a symbol of resilience, became the very thing that consumed him. The tragedy of Terry Crews isn't about vanity, it's about survival. A man who believed he could outlift pain, outwork age, outmuscle doubt. But in the end, even he learned the truth that every bodybuilder, every star, and every addict must face. No matter how powerful you look on the outside, you can't lift what's breaking inside. 12. Vin Diesel. He once stood as the symbol of unstoppable masculinity, the gravel voice, the shaved head, the body built like a tank. Vin Diesel wasn't just an actor, he was a brand of power. In the Fast and Furious universe, he didn't just play the alpha, he was the alpha, both on screen and off. But the truth behind that hardened image was far more fragile. Beneath the muscle and the myth was a man fighting against time, against expectation, and against the fading illusion of invincibility. As years passed, his body became his battlefield. The roles demanded the same brutal physique he'd built decades ago, but the mirror no longer cooperated. Endless diets, performance enhancers, and private medical routines filled the gaps where youth once lived. Trainers whispered about hormone cycles and synthetic boosters, all in the name of staying camera strong. He wasn't chasing fame anymore, he was chasing the ghost of the man he used to be. Vin's public persona began to fracture. Candid photos showed a softer figure, and headlines called it a dad bod, mocking the same man who once embodied cinematic toughness. The pressure grew unbearable. What had started as pride became paranoia, an endless loop of rebuilding what the world refused to let decay. Every workout turned desperate, every photo opportunity, a silent confrontation with time. Inside, the toll deepened. His joints screamed, his recovery slowed, his spirit dimmed. He once told friends that Hollywood doesn't forgive weakness. And so, he hid his exhaustion behind sunglasses and slogans about family. But behind closed doors, the struggle was relentless, a man drowning in the very image that made him a legend. Vin Diesel's story isn't about ego, it's about captivity. The cage wasn't made of steel or fame, it was made of muscle. And as the years carved away at the myth, what remained was something raw, human, and heartbreakingly mortal. 11. Joe Manganiello. He was the kind of man who looked sculpted by the gods, a perfect blend of grace and danger, every muscle sharpened for the camera. Joe Manganiello's rise to fame came on a wave of admiration for his physique. From True Blood to Magic Mike, he became Hollywood's visual shorthand for raw, masculine power. But behind that unshakable image of control lay something far more fragile, a body slowly paying for the illusion of perfection. From his earliest roles, Joe was haunted by expectation. Casting agents didn't want depth, they wanted definition. Every contract, every magazine cover carried the same unspoken demand. Stay enormous, stay perfect, stay superhuman. Hours in the gym turned to full days. Recovery drinks turned into injections, and whispers followed about hormone therapy, about chemical optimization, about a man who was no longer training for roles, but for survival. Behind the spotlight, his health began to crumble. His tendons tore, his hormones crashed. Friends described a man trapped in a permanent cycle of training, medicating, and pretending to be okay. The body that built his fame became his tormentor. Doctors warned him to slow down, but the fear of fading, of becoming invisible, was stronger than pain. Even his relationship, once a beacon of Hollywood glamour, showed the cracks of his obsession. Late-night workouts, endless fatigue, the constant hunger to stay camera-ready. The image of Joe Manganiello, the indestructible alpha, was eating Joe the man alive. He once said, "I built myself because I didn't want to be broken again." But the cruel irony is that the building never stopped, even when the foundation gave way. For Joe, steroids weren't about vanity. They were about survival in an industry that feeds on beauty, then destroys those who can't sustain it. The monster on screen wasn't his character, it was the pressure that lived inside his skin. 10. Channing Tatum. He started as the everyman dream, a dancer turned movie star, charming, humble, and human. Channing Tatum's rise was built on sweat, rhythm, and raw charisma. But when Hollywood crowned him a sex symbol, something inside him began to fracture. The studios didn't just want Channing, they wanted his body, immortalized in slow motion, under perfect lighting. The man who once danced for joy now worked out for survival, locked in a silent war with his reflection. When Magic Mike turned him into an icon of desire, that image became his curse. He trained until he collapsed, cut his meals to ounces, lived on caffeine and chemical helpers. Every role demanded another transformation, leaner, bigger, sharper. The pressure to stay the man every woman wants turned into an obsession that consumed his peace. Crew members described the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he'd joke about painkillers, the moments he vanished after filming to recover from weeks of starvation and training. Rumors began to swirl about performance drugs, about secret regimens behind his sculpted look. He never confirmed anything, but his body told its own story. His metabolism crashed, sleep disappeared, and his mood swung between bursts of manic energy and days of silence. He once admitted, "I can't live like this forever," but Hollywood never let him stop. Behind the fame, there was a man who just wanted to breathe again, to eat without guilt, to exist without the camera dissecting every inch of his skin. Channing Tatum became both product and prisoner, a victim of an industry that worships youth while punishing anyone who dares to age. The tragedy isn't that he changed, it's that he was never allowed not to. Steroids may have built the muscle, but pressure built the addiction. For Channing Tatum, the mirror stopped being a reflection long ago. It became a battlefield where perfection always wins and humanity always loses. 9. Christian Bale. He was Hollywood's ultimate chameleon, a man who could vanish into any role, any face, any body. Christian Bale didn't just act, he transformed. But behind those legendary metamorphoses lay a level of physical torment that blurred the line between dedication and self-destruction. His body became his canvas, his weapon, and ultimately, his punishment. From the skeletal frame of The Machinist to the monstrous muscle of Batman Begins, Bale's transformations defied biology. Audiences called it genius. Doctors called it madness. The weight swings, The chemical assistants whispered about behind the scenes it was all too extreme to be natural. His metabolism was forced through cycles of starvation and overgrowth, supported, some said, by hormones and enhancers that kept his body from collapsing under the stress. He became addicted not to drugs, but to control. To the applause that came each time he shattered another physical limit. The pain became part of the performance, the exhaustion part of the art. Between films, he hid away to recover, his body trembling from the damage of constant manipulation. His closest friends said he would disappear into his characters and forget himself, maybe because there was nothing left to return to. The world saw a genius, the ultimate method actor, but few saw the aftermath, the insomnia, the mood swings, the injuries that never healed. Each new role demanded another sacrifice, another experiment on his own flesh, and when he finally stood as Batman, the image of strength, it was built on years of self-inflicted ruin. Christian Bale's story is not one of vanity, but of obsession, the dangerous belief that greatness justifies destruction. He turned his body into art, and art into suffering. And when the applause faded, the only thing left was the cost a body that would never fully recover, and a man who proved that sometimes the role consumes the actor long before the credits roll. 8. Henry Cavill. He looked like the perfect man, tall, calm, carved from marble. When Henry Cavill first appeared as Superman, the world called him the closest thing to a real-life hero. His body was a masterpiece, flawless symmetry, impossible strength, a presence that made every frame feel mythic. But behind that heroic image was a story of torment, discipline, and the silent suffering of a man consumed by the need to look invincible. Cavill's transformation for Man of Steel was legendary. Trainers spoke of brutal regimens, dehydration, starvation, and constant conditioning designed to keep him superhuman for every camera angle. What fans didn't see were the whispers of hormone therapy and enhancer cycles, the extreme programs that no natural body could endure indefinitely. The pressure didn't stop when filming ended. The world demanded the same body at every event, every red carpet, every selfie. He became trapped in his own myth, the mortal forced to live like a god. Over time, that perfection took its toll. He spoke openly about exhaustion, about mental strain, about losing the joy of simply existing. To maintain Superman's body, he lived like a machine, his identity reduced to macros, routines, and recovery injections. When The Witcher came along, he pushed himself again, tearing his hamstring in a desperate attempt to stay powerful, to stay worthy of the hero image that the world worshipped. Off camera, Cavill began to fade from the Hollywood spotlight. Fans noticed the weariness, the distant tone, the quiet detachment from fame. The man who once seemed unbreakable had been broken by the very myth he embodied. Henry Cavill's tragedy is subtle but devastating. He didn't fall from scandal or addiction, he fell from perfection. Steroids may not have built his legend, but the obsession they symbolize did. He became the world's Superman, but the cost was his peace, his freedom, and the quiet truth that no man, not even Henry Cavill, can be super forever. 7. Tom Hardy. He was the embodiment of controlled chaos, a man whose presence could fill a room before he even spoke. Tom Hardy's intensity wasn't just in his eyes or his performances, it lived in every muscle of his body. From the prison brute in Bronson to the masked warrior in The Dark Knight Rises, his transformations became legend. But what the audience saw as dedication was, in truth, something darker, a series of physical experiments that pushed his body to breaking point. For Bronson, Hardy gained an impossible amount of mass in only a few months. Trainers called it beyond human speed. Rumors of steroid cycles began to swirl, whispered about in gyms and film sets alike. He laughed them off, saying he just ate like a monster, but insiders knew the toll such rapid change can take. The constant strain left him with torn ligaments, joint pain, and a metabolism that began to rebel. Each new role became a test of endurance rather than artistry. He once admitted he wasn't built for this kind of weight, and it showed. After Bane, he suffered from chronic injuries, struggling to maintain the massive frame that had made him a cinematic icon. But Hollywood had already fallen in love with the monster he'd created. Every script that followed wanted the same bulk, the same menace. Hardy was trapped by the very body that made him famous. Behind the tattoos and the quiet charisma was a man addicted not to fame, but to transformation. The muscles became armor, a way to protect himself from the chaos inside. Yet each metamorphosis left another scar, another reminder that even the strongest men break when the world keeps asking for more. Tom Hardy's story is one of brilliance shadowed by pain. He became a symbol of strength by destroying his own. In chasing power, he lost balance. In becoming the beast, he sacrificed the man. 6. Chris Evans. He was never supposed to be the embodiment of American perfection, yet that's exactly what he became. When Chris Evans stepped out as Captain America, the world saw the ideal man, noble, disciplined, carved from heroism itself. But the path to that image was paved with pain, pressure, and the quiet fear of never measuring up again. Behind the patriotic shield and effortless smile was a body meticulously engineered, maintained through exhaustion, and haunted by the weight of expectation. Evans's transformation from a lean young actor into a superhero icon was so drastic that fans called it impossible. Trainers praised his natural discipline, but whispers in Hollywood gyms painted another story, one of grueling regimens enhanced by chemistry, hormone therapy, and performance cycles designed to sustain the impossible. For years he lived in constant preparation, eating by the clock, sleeping by formula, training until his joints screamed. The cameras demanded he stay America's body, even when his back gave out, even when fatigue blurred his focus. He once confessed that the hardest part of playing Captain America wasn't the acting, but the recovery. Between films he tried to disappear, to live quietly, yet the world refused to let him fade. Every headline, every fan photo reminded him that the myth had become his identity. He was no longer Chris Evans, he was a symbol, a flawless machine the public expected to look immortal. The real man beneath the uniform began to erode, lost beneath protein shakes, physical therapy, and the echoing hum of Hollywood's demands. When he finally stepped away from the Marvel Universe, his relief was almost tangible. "I want my life back," he said softly, words that carried the weight of years lived under pressure no human should endure. Chris Evans's tragedy isn't dramatic, but it's quietly devastating. Steroids may be denied, the rumors unconfirmed, yet the truth remains. The world turned a kind-hearted actor into a living statue, and even statues eventually crack. 5. Zachary Levi. He was once the charming, lanky tech guy from Chuck, funny, humble, the kind of actor audiences felt they could know. But then came Shazam, and with it, a transformation so sudden and dramatic that it made headlines. The man who used to play the awkward underdog was suddenly built like a superhero. His shoulders broadened, his frame exploded with definition, and the world couldn't stop talking about how he'd finally made it. But behind the excitement was a darker truth, the story of a man pushed beyond his limits by Hollywood's unspoken obsession with perfection. Levi's new body became a marketing tool. Every interview, every poster, every headline fixated on his muscles. The studio called it dedication, but the change happened so quickly that whispers of hormone use and chemical boosters began to follow him. Trainers close to the production hinted at supplement programs, far beyond protein shakes. And while Levi brushed off the speculation, those around him noticed his energy spikes, the mood swings, the fatigue that no amount of rest could erase. For the first time, his confidence turned brittle. He admitted to anxiety, to spirals of self-doubt, to struggling under the weight of the superhero image he was forced to maintain. Behind the suit, the pressure to look invincible became suffocating. The lines blurred between the man and the costume, between the actor and the body that no longer felt like his own. Off camera, his health began to show the cost. Insomnia, injuries, and a creeping sense of emotional detachment haunted him through filming. He once said, "The suit makes you feel powerful, but it also reminds you you're not." That sentence became a quiet confession, a crack in the heroic facade. Zachary Levi's story is one of transformation turned tragedy. He wanted to play a superhero. Instead, he became another casualty of Hollywood's war on imperfection, a man who learned too late that power built on pressure never lasts. 4. Robbie Williams. He was the golden boy of pop, magnetic, mischievous, unstoppable. Robbie Williams could fill stadiums, charm millions, and make self-destruction look like performance art. But when the music quieted and the lights dimmed, he was left alone with the only critic who truly mattered, the one in the mirror. In his own words, "I wanted to be perfect. I wanted to look like the person the world loved." That hunger would lead him somewhere darker, into a spiral of obsession, hormones, and the slow corrosion of the man behind the smile. After years of battling depression and addiction, Robbie's focus shifted. He began to chase a new high control over his body. Friends noticed the change: a sharper jawline, bulked shoulders, a constant fixation on his physique. He spoke openly about using hormone replacement therapy and testosterone to feel younger, calling it medicine. But the doses grew, and the side effects followed: insomnia, anxiety, flashes of rage. What began as self-improvement became another form of dependency. The transformation thrilled his fans, but it terrified those close to him. His body looked better than ever, yet his mind unraveled. He once described the feeling of being wired and hollow, a paradox that followed every injection. The confidence was artificial, the energy unstable. His doctors warned him about the dangers of prolonged use, but Hollywood's appetite for perfection didn't leave much room for stopping. He joked about it on stage, laughing off the whispers, but the truth lingered behind the humor, a pop icon trying to stay young in an industry that feeds on youth like currency. The more he tried to preserve himself, the more he disappeared beneath the chemicals meant to save him. Robbie Williams's tragedy isn't about fame or vanity, it's about fear, the fear of fading. He built his identity on being larger than life, but the body that once carried him to glory became the very thing that betrayed him. Fame gave him the stage. Steroids stole his peace. 3. Jeremy Renner. He was never supposed to be a superhero. Jeremy Renner wasn't born into Hollywood privilege or comic book mythology. He built his career with grit, quiet rage, and the kind of intensity that made every role feel real. From The Hurt Locker to The Avengers, he became the face of endurance, of resilience, of the everyman who refused to break. But somewhere between action sequences and red carpets, that strength became something else, an obsession with staying indestructible, no matter the cost. Renner's rise into the superhero world came with a burden few could imagine. Marvel demanded perfection, lean muscle, no flaws, no fatigue. Years of constant physical training, stunt work, and reshoots pushed his body beyond recovery. Whispers spread that he'd turned to enhancement drugs to keep up with the physical toll, small cycles of steroids or testosterone to restore what exhaustion had taken. Nothing was ever confirmed, but the strain was undeniable. By the time his accident hit the headlines, the snowplow incident that shattered more than 30 bones, the image of invincibility was gone. Fans saw the blood, the wires, the pain. But beneath that tragedy was another truth. This was a man whose body had been breaking long before the machine hit him. A lifetime of forced transformation had left him fragile beneath the muscle. In interviews afterward, Renner spoke softly about survival. He admitted he'd pushed himself too far, that he had forgotten what rest felt like. His recovery became a public spectacle, the broken hero rebuilding himself again. Yet this time, there were no trainers, no cycles, no scripts, just pain and the slow rediscovery of being human. Jeremy Renner's story is not about steroids, it's about what leads someone there. The pressure to remain powerful, the terror of slowing down, the myth that real men never stop. Hollywood turned him into a symbol of endurance. Fate reminded him that even heroes have bones that break, and hearts that can't be rebuilt in the gym. 2. Brian Shaw. He was called the world's strongest man, a giant who could lift cars, pull planes, and make the impossible look routine. Brian Shaw wasn't a movie star or a pop idol, but in his world, he was a legend. 4-time champion, record breaker, icon of human power. His body was his empire, towering, immense, seemingly invincible. But inside that monument of strength was a man quietly unraveling under the weight of his own creation. Shaw lived for competition. Every day was a ritual of food, iron, and injections. The doses weren't secrets in his industry. Steroids and growth hormones were an unspoken rule among strongmen, the invisible fuel behind world records. Shaw himself admitted that he used what was necessary to stay on top. The cycle was simple: build, break, rebuild. But over time, the breaks became harder to heal. His joints swelled, his blood pressure spiked, his organs strained under the massive load his ambition demanded. He began to live inside a body that no longer belonged to him. Breathing became a battle. Sleep was suffocating. His heart worked overtime just to sustain his size. Friends and doctors warned him to stop, but power is an addiction and fame disguised it as purpose. The crowds didn't see the pain or the medical machines humming at night. They saw strength, and strength became his prison. When he finally stepped away from competition, his tone changed. He spoke about learning to be human again, about losing hundreds of pounds, about feeling fragile, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. The steroids that made him a champion had also stolen his balance, his freedom, and nearly his life. Brian Shaw's tragedy is the purest form of the steroid curse. He didn't chase vanity or fame, he chased greatness. And in the process, he discovered the cruelest truth of all, that even the strongest man in the world can be broken by the very thing that made him strong. 1. Michael Clark Duncan. He was the gentle giant, a mountain of a man with a heart that glowed on screen. When Michael Clark Duncan appeared in the Green Mile, the world saw strength wrapped in kindness, power softened by soul. His voice could shake a room, but his smile could calm it. To millions, he was proof that true strength didn't need to intimidate, it could heal. Yet behind that warmth lay a lifetime of physical demands, of pushing a body built on size and strength far beyond what nature ever intended. Before Hollywood, Duncan worked in manual labor, construction, and bodyguarding jobs that prized mass over moderation. When he began acting, his physique became his ticket in. The studios loved it. Casting directors built entire roles around it. But to maintain that monumental frame, Duncan resorted to extreme measures, endless training, supplements, and, as many insiders believed, anabolic cycles that kept his enormous body stage-ready even as it began to fail him. As his fame grew, so did the toll. His heart worked harder with every pound of muscle added. His blood pressure surged. Yet the industry demanded the same size, the same force, the same image of invincible masculinity. He tried to change, going vegan, adjusting his diet, but years of chemical enhancement had already written their story inside his veins. When he suffered a massive heart attack in his mid-50s, the world was shocked. The man who had played miracles on screen was gone far too soon. Doctors hinted at the damage long-term steroid use could inflict enlarged hearts, vascular strain, silent breakdowns within. Fans remembered the gentle laugh, the kindness, the humility. Few saw the pain behind it. Michael Clark Duncan's story is the final echo in a long, tragic pattern. A man who carried the expectations of an image too heavy for any heart to bear. Hollywood made him a giant. The pursuit of strength made him a ghost. And in the end, his greatest role wasn't one he played, it was the warning he left behind. They chased perfection until it devoured them. Every syringe, every rep, every desperate moment in front of the mirror was another step toward a body that could never be real and a soul that could never rest. Steroids promised beauty, fame, and immortality. But in the end, all they gave was silence. These stars weren't monsters. They were dreamers, trapped in a system that worships flesh more than spirit. They believed power would protect them, that muscle meant meaning. Yet every story ends the same way, with pain, loss, and the hollow echo of applause that no longer feels like love. Fame built them, steroids broke them, and in the ruins of their perfection, Hollywood keeps looking for the next body to sacrifice.